The old woman shoves the girl and says angrily, "You ungrateful girl! You're so foolish! How dare you try to take credit for your work? If you say one more word, I'll teach you a lesson you never forget." After saying that, she storms away. Just then, the company boss happens to be passing by when the girl's phone rings. She sits down to the side and answers her grandmother's call. The girl says sadly, "Hello, Grandma. I don't want to keep doing this job anymore. I want to come home." Her grandmother says worriedly, "Oh, sweetheart, what's wrong? You work so hard to keep this job in the city. Why do you suddenly want to quit?" The girl sighs and says sadly, "When I come here, they promised to pay me $6,000 a month, but now 3 months pass and they only pay me $1,000 a month. After I pay my rent and utility bills, I don't have any money left." Her grandmother says gently, "How can that be? Why don't you wait a little longer? Maybe things get better once you receive a promotion." The girl shakes her head and says sadly, "Grandma, I'm never going to get promoted. You don't know what's happening. The manager asks me to write project proposals for her and promises that I will receive a bonus. For the past 3 months, I work all day and write proposals all night. I only sleep 2 or 3 hours a day. I submit several proposals during these 3 months, but they never give me a single bonus. How can I possibly get promoted?" The boss can no longer stay silent. He steps forward and says firmly, "That's enough." The girl quickly stands up and says nervously, "Boss, you're here?" The boss looks at her and says seriously, "Instead of working during company hours, you're sitting here? I hear everything you say on the phone. It sounds like you have a lot of complaints about this company." The girl lowers her head and says softly, "No, boss." The boss nods and says calmly, "If you're done with your work, come to my office with me." The girl follows him. Meanwhile, the old woman hands a file to the manager and says worriedly, "Sweetheart, look at this proposal. It's really difficult." The manager frowns and says impatiently, "Mom, don't I tell you? Don't call me your daughter at work. Call me your cousin." The old woman covers her mouth and says apologetically, "Oops, it slips out, but this proposal really is difficult." The manager waves her hand and says dismissively, "What's so difficult about it?" At that moment, she notices the girl and motions for her to come over. The girl walks up and says politely, "Do you need something?" The manager hands her the file and says coldly, "This proposal needs to be on the boss's desk by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Finish it today and bring it to me." The girl hesitates and says nervously, "My shift is almost over. I still have a lot of work to do. I don't think I can finish such a large proposal." The manager sneers and says mockingly, "Why not? Aren't you a college graduate? You can't even write a simple proposal? Honestly, you're not even worth the $1,000 salary paid to a janitor." The girl clenches her fists and says determinedly, "I can do it. Even if I don't eat or sleep tonight, I finish this proposal. I'll get started right away." The manager stops her and says sharply, "Wait, I'm not done talking. You really have no sense of workplace rules. Listen carefully. After you finish the proposal, put my cousin's name on it instead of yours. Got it?" The girl lowers her head and says quietly, "Yes, I understand." The manager leans closer and says coldly, "If anyone besides the two of us finds out about this, I'll make you regret it. You'll do all the work and I'll get the bonus. Do you understand?" The girl nods and says quietly, "Yes, I understand." The manager points toward the door and says angrily, "If you understand, then get out of here." The girl turns around and leaves. A few days later, the boss hands a large bonus to the girl. At that moment, the manager walks into the office with her mother. The manager looks surprised and says curiously, "You want to see me?" The boss looks at her and says calmly, "Have you reviewed this proposal? It's an excellent proposal. I'm very satisfied with it." She then looks at the bonus and says casually, "That's great. Since you're satisfied, I'll go ahead and collect the bonus for my cousin." The boss raises his hand and says seriously, "Wait a minute. I want to ask you something. Why do you think this bonus belongs to you?" The manager looks confused and says confidently, "Why wouldn't it? That's an obvious question. Boss, because my cousin writes the proposal." The manager's mother steps forward and says proudly, "That's right, boss. I write this proposal. I stay up all day and all night to finish it." The boss stares at them and says suspiciously, "Is that really true?" The manager immediately says confidently, "Of course it is. Why would we lie? My cousin absolutely writes this proposal." The manager's mother nods and says proudly, "Yes, boss. I'm a university graduate. I handle all the major and minor proposals for this company." The boss nods slowly and says firmly, "I already investigate everything. Starting tomorrow, you don't have to wear a janitor's uniform anymore." He turns toward the girl and says warmly, "You'll take over my manager's cousin's position." The girl smiles brightly and says happily, "Thank you, boss. Thank you so much." The manager's face immediately darkens. She steps forward and says angrily, "What do you mean? You're saying she takes my cousin's position? Then what happens to my cousin?" The boss looks at her and says calmly, "I'm giving you two choices. First, take your cousin and leave my company. Second, starting tomorrow, the two of you work in the janitorial and security departments." The manager points at herself and says angrily, "I'm a senior manager at this company. How can you treat me like this?" The boss looks at her sternly and says seriously, "I hire you to serve the employees and help manage this company, not to abuse your authority. You exploit this young woman for your cousin's benefit. You pay her the lowest salary and force her to do the hardest and most exhausting work. Are you trying to destroy my company?"
The manager crosses her arms and says defensively,
"Boss, you don't understand. She's just a poor girl from the countryside. She hurts the image of our company. She's only fit for cleaning jobs. My cousin is different. She grows up in the city." The boss shakes his head and says firmly, "Where do you get this sense of superiority? Everyone comes from somewhere. Everything you see around you today exists because of the hard work of farmers and working people. Why do you look down on them? Let me tell you something. The taller a tree grows, the deeper its roots become. And the greater a person becomes, the more they remember where they come from." He points toward the girl and says sincerely, "In my eyes, this young woman is honest, kind, hardworking, and always willing to do her best. She has far more dignity than you do." The boss takes a deep breath and says coldly, "That's enough. I don't want to hear another word. Take your cousin and leave my company. Both of you are fired." The manager stares at him in disbelief and says bitterly, "You're really doing this to me? I work for this company for years. I sacrificed so much for you, and now you're firing me because of some girl from the countryside? Nobody supports this decision." The boss looks around the office and says confidently, "It's not up to you to decide who supports it. People may hide their actions, but justice always finds its way. Everyone, listen carefully. Today, I'm standing up for this hard-working young woman from the countryside, and I officially terminate both the manager and her cousin. Tell me, everyone, am I doing the right thing?"